Right now on Upfront.
Battleground Blitz.
But I think we're going to win this. Just being here tonight.
37 days from Election Day, the candidates, the supporters barnstorming the state.
Right here in Waukesha County, we have you.
Now the push to dominate the swing states.
We can vote. We can be on the right side of history.
Tremendous energy. It almost feels as though the election's next week.
Our guest this Sunday, former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy and Alexis McGill Johnson, president of Planned Parenthood.
Then the big call.
Accuracy is the gold standard. 100% accuracy.
The Associated Press tasked with calling the race for president the high stakes and incredible pressure. Anna Johnson, the AP's Washington bureau chief, with us one-on-one with a behind-the-scenes look.
And the big talkers, hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots in the mail. One mayor moving the city's ballot drop box into his own office. The city of Madison sending thousands of voters 2 ballots. J.R. Ross moments away to break it all down.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. 37 days to go. The presidential campaigns increasing their presence in Wisconsin. Former President Donald Trump campaigning in Prairie du Chien Saturday and is expected back in Madison and Milwaukee on Tuesday.
This following a Trump campaign bus tour this past week. 9 cities with various surrogates, ending in Waukesha with former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, who's with us on the campaign trail.
Thanks for giving us a couple minutes. I want to start here in Wisconsin. Mail-in voting is underway. Absentee ballots are now out. We've heard a bunch of things about mail-in voting, right? Trump says, go do it, then he calls it stupid. I'm curious, what would you tell Republicans as we sit here today, almost 5 weeks out?
I think the message is totally consistent. If you don't like the rules, you got to win to change the rules. And the only way you're going to do it is by casting the vote in every legal manner possible. So, that's the only rules we have. So even if you don't like the rules, you got to win the election to be in a position to change it. So I don't see any inconsistency there. My advice to Republican voters, frankly, to anybody who cares about the future of this country, is not only to vote, but to figure out how every other informed citizen can also make the commitment to vote this year. I think the future of our country depends on it.
Republicans here in Wisconsin have said if they don't catch up to Democrats in early voting, they're going to lose the state. Is that fair?
Look, I think that's a healthy message, certainly.
Yeah.
I think that complacency is a big risk in this election. I think complacency was a risk in 2022. We were promised a red wave that didn't come. I think we're now awakened to the fact that we don't want to see that happen again.
It looks like there's still a small group of independents here in the state who haven't made up their mind, and those are the voters that are really going to be targeted. Hitting off what you said recently about Republicans, I'm worried we're going to be in for a rude awakening this November, adding we're not going to win by obsessing about the other side, we're going to win by answering who we are and what we actually stand for. Was that a message to Trump?
I think it's a message to our entire movement. I've been saying this since the first day I ran for U.S. president. It's up to us to not just be running from something, we got to be running to something. And the left, I think, lays this trap for us. They give us a lot to criticize. And I think we got to do some of that. We got to draw contrasts, but we have to do more than that. We have to offer our own vision of what it means to be a conservative, what it means to be an American today. What are the values that still unite this country? Are we one country? I believe we are. But we have to speak to those values of meritocracy, free speech, the rule of law, self-governance. These are basic ideals that I think unite most Americans, regardless of their partisan affiliation.
Let me ask you about your supporters. I talked with a lot of them in Iowa, here in Wisconsin, who thought that you were fresh for Republicans, right? Radical, perhaps, a change. What do you tell those voters who still are a little hesitant about voting for Trump and say, you know what, maybe I'll just stay home this cycle?
Yeah, so look, I think I would say the same thing, that give them the same rationale that I would give the other independent voters as well. I didn't agree with Donald Trump on 100% of his policies when I ran for U.S. president, but I have endorsed him and he has my full support because I think he is the best hope we have to revive the country over the next 4 years. You know what, we're not voting for, this is not an engagement party for who you're going to marry, okay? This is an election of who's going to make your life better. And between the two choices we have, it is hands down clear that Donald Trump is going to be the leader who revives our sense of American strength, American prosperity, and I think a fortitude of our national spirit. That's, I think, the real wild card in this election. Voters will tell you they care about the economy, they care about the border and immigration, rightly so. But I think there's something deeper going on where people across the country, especially young people, they're so hungry for purpose right now, hungry to be part of something bigger than themselves. That's this country. And I think Donald Trump inspires and is able to inspire that level of national pride in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. And so that's my case to the people who were looking to vote for me, who were disappointed that I dropped out. I'm supporting Donald Trump because I think he's going to be the best candidate still to carry that 1776 vision forward for the next 4 years.
Are Republicans doing that well enough right now ahead of the election?
There's always room for improvement. I'm always somebody
5 weeks left.
Yeah, there's always room for improvement. I'm somebody who holds myself to a high standard. I can criticize the other side, but part of this is also holding our side to the highest possible standard. I think we're doing great. I think I'd like to see many of the Senate candidates. One of the things that we're seeing, it's a hard truth, so I'll just say it, is Donald Trump is overperforming Senate candidates by double digits on the Republican side. So I think that Donald Trump is doing a great job of this. What I'd like to see in the next 5 weeks is a lot of the down ballot candidates take that level of fortitude and leadership to their own message as well, from Ohio to Wisconsin to candidates in other states as well. Because it's not enough just to put Donald Trump in the White House. We've got to have governing majorities in the Senate and House as well. But I am optimistic that we have good room for that to happen between now and November.
Vice presidential debate is Tuesday night. What does J.D. Vance need to do? Does this debate matter?
Look, I think on policy, there's no doubt who's stronger. J.D., I think, will frankly mop the floor with Tim Walz on policy. The thing he's up against and that we're all up against is the media really filters one narrative of what happened at the debate relative to the reality of that. And I think with the vice presidential debate especially, many people may not watch the debate, but we'll see what the media's distillation is of it afterwards. That being said, I don't believe in being a victim and being a crybaby about it. That's just the playing field and describing it like it is. I am confident that we win on policy at every level, from the presidency to the vice presidency, all the way down the ballot. The more we're clear about that, the more successful we're going to be.
That vice presidential debate Tuesday night. This as the Harris campaign this weekend barnstorming Wisconsin with a bus tour focused on abortion rights. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Waukesha today, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Madison Friday. And this week, the president of Planned Parenthood will campaign across the state as well. Ahead of that, Alexis McGill Johnson is with us. She's the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Action Fund and Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Alexis, welcome to Upfront.
Thank you so much for having me.
So talk to me about these final few weeks of this campaign. You're hitting battleground states like Wisconsin. Who are you really trying to target in your outreach?
Reproductive freedom voters. Look, we know that across the country, most voters agree that at no point in pregnancy is a politician more qualified than a doctor or a woman to make a decision about their own body. And we have seen the outrage since the Dobbs decision, since Trump put those abortion bans in place. So we're speaking to everyone, to young people, to women, to men, to, generations who truly understand what it means when a fundamental freedom has been taken away and the impact that it has on our care, on our bodies, on our families, and on our communities.
We know that Kamala Harris has made reproductive freedoms and abortion rights a key message of this campaign. In Wisconsin, though, abortion is not the top issue facing voters in Wisconsin, women voters, or those independents. Do you think that the campaign needs to be focusing so much on abortion rights, given that voters do not make that their top issue?
Well, look, Wisconsinites have done an incredible amount of work over the last couple of years to ensure that their rights have been protected in the state Supreme Court fight that you had last year. But the reality is, if Donald Trump and J.D. Vance get into office, we know the havoc that will come, right? A national abortion ban. So I want to be clear to everyone in Wisconsin, your rights are on the line as well. Even though you have protections right now in your state, the reality is Kamala Harris is the only one on the ballot who actually is fighting for reproductive freedom.
So what do you tell to those undecided voters, for instance, here in Wisconsin, who say that the economy is their top issue and that they trust former President Donald Trump over Kamala Harris on that issue?
Reproductive rights are also an economic issue, right? And these things should not be separated, right? Your ability to decide when, if, and how you become a parent has many factors, including economic factors. And so I do believe that making the connection between the impact of a national abortion ban, the impact of what we are already seeing in states with, with bans where OBGYN providers are no longer matching into those states because they fear criminalization, how that impacts the economy, right? Economy isn't just, about a philosophy. It's about like what happens in a community when you don't have access to health care.
The Trump campaign, former President Donald Trump has said that he's not looking at a national abortion ban. What's your response to that?
I think, you have shown us better than you can tell us, right? Trump bragged famously about putting 3 Supreme Court justices in play who would overturn Roe v. Wade. And in fact, that is exactly what they have done. And so at every turn, he has said what he believes. And I think we should continue to take him at what he has done.
You're a key voice for Democrats surrounding the future of abortion access. Do you support any limits to abortion at this point or at any point?
I am not a doctor. I trust doctors and I trust women to make decisions about their own bodies, right? And I think that's really what the reproductive freedom fight is about. It is about understanding that at no point in pregnancy is a politician or a nonprofit executive more qualified than a doctor or woman to make these decisions.
And is that the same view of the Harris campaign?
The vice president is focused on protecting and restoring reproductive freedom. The vice president understands that when we do not have access to reproductive health care, when we have criminalized providers and put fear in them from treating patients that they have been trained to treat, we end up with situations like Candy Miller and Amber Thurman in Georgia, 2 young Black women who no longer are with their families, right? Who we have lost because of the inability of those providers to provide the care that they need. That's what's at stake here, and that's where we really need to keep the focus.
Alexis McGill-Johnson, the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Action Fund and the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, with us ahead of her visit to Battleground, Wisconsin. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, the big call. The Associated Press preparing to call the key races, including the race for president. Now, an inside look at how they'll do it. The AP's Washington bureau chief standing by with us next.